Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of our ongoing Ask the Editor series. Thank you all for coming out. My name is Becky, and I'm here today with Timothy Green, the editor of Rattle. How are you, Tim?
I'm doing great, and I'm really glad to be here. I think I've watched a whole bunch of these. I'm like a reclusive type of person, so I don't go to AWP. I don't talk to other editors. So it's been great to see, their perspectives on things, like what I do every day, other people do, and I don't even know what they think about it. So it's been great to watch these. I really enjoyed them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I understand that you don't typically do these sorts of things, so I really appreciate for you making time for us today, making an exception for this. And thank you all so much for coming out. If you have any questions at any time during the interview, feel free to just type them into the chat and I will work them into the conversation with Tim. And I understand you just came from another event for Rattle. Can you talk about that? It's a Rattle podcast.
Yeah, well, we have a podcast on Sundays where we interview a poet and we have an open mic. But this is the critique of the week, which we do every Friday. And so I've been doing this for 3 years on Fridays. And so anybody who wants to can it used to just be you had to leave a Facebook post or a Facebook comment under a thing. And that was a way to secretly get more Facebook interaction and then lift the reach of posts. But Facebook made that illegal or whatever. So now we just use Submittable, but you can go to Submittable and submit to have your poems critiqued or workshopped like live. And so it's through Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter broadcasts it. And so it's to give everybody that workshop experience. It's so valuable, like in an MFA program that we don't have, a lot of people don't have access to. And so we do that. So I give my advice and read other people's comments, and we all try to like workshop the poem like we would at the Iowa style workshop. And then, and it's also a way to, people always say, can you have some feedback on this poem? And you just can't when you get this many submissions. Mm-hmm. But I can say, hey, watch critiques of the week and submit your poem there and we'll workshop it if you want. And so it sort of kills two birds with one stone. And I think it's helpful. That's an hour it's noon Eastern time every Friday for an hour or so.
And do you just choose the poems randomly? Because I can't imagine you get to all of them in an hour.
No, yeah. So I use a random list generator to, I put everybody who entered in, and then I pick, you'll see it if you watch the last episode at the very end. Then I pick the next group of people that are going to be up.
And it's just you critiquing the poem.
Well, it's me and everybody else. I mean, we have a group of like maybe 24 people that are like regulars there. So it really feels like you're sitting around a workshop in an MFA program or something.
Right.
And, so we get all their feedback and people disagree with me, and that's great. So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
So let's cover broadly. So Rattle does a lot. And I was researching you guys today and sort of over the course of the week, and I was really surprised because I know you're this leading poetry magazine, but I didn't realize you also have a podcast and this Ekphrastic challenge, and you do something with young poets, and you have the podcast. Did I say that? Yeah. And the critique of the week. Yeah.
Yeah. And Poets Respond about current events too. We have a series for news poems.
Wow. And is it, so I imagine it's not just you doing all of these things.
Me and my wife. My wife's our assistant editor.
Okay.
But it's just us. This is our house, and we just do it here. We have one computer, and
That's amazing. And you have a full-time job.
This is my full-time job.
Oh,
that's how it's possible.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Mm-hmm. Very cool. Okay. So can you tell us also about the Ekphrastic challenge?
Yeah, so that's something that we did. Who was I should say, I'm really bad. Everybody should be warned. I'm really terrible at names and remembering things and details. My wife, Megan, will tell you that too. It's a photographer. I want to get her name. Oh, Judy Keown in Texas, a photographer that we had for a cover photo of issue 41 or something, suggested this. It was just her idea. And I thought it was a great idea, where she offered to put up a photograph of hers and let people write poems about it. And so we did the very first one. It was a spider. And, so I picked one and she picked her favorite of all the submissions. And that was just fun to do. I think of it as a way to, break writer's block and give people something to write about. Because I think writing is a really important thing to be doing. And it's really helpful in a lot of psychological and emotional ways and things. And it's good to be honing your craft. And so having like a prompt every month is a really useful thing. So we've been doing that for, I don't know when the first one, let me look at the first. I got to scroll all the way down. The first one was fall 2014. And so since then, we just, every month there's a new artist, and we pick a piece, and then we put it up for the month, and we get about maybe 500 submissions is the average per month for that series. And the artist picks, I filter, we filter down to the top like 25 or so poems, so the artist doesn't have to read 500. But then the artist picks one, then I pick one, and so we have 2 poems after every painting or photograph. We've been doing that for years, so it's a lot of fun.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And can you tell us about the young poets too?
Yeah, that's another thing that we just like to have ideas. I like to keep trying new things. And me and Megan were just having breakfast at a restaurant one time, and she just said, hey, it'd be cool if we had kids poems. And so I thought, hey, let's try it. So we tried this Rattle Young Poets anthology, and it was just amazing.
Yeah.
Like if you look back at that first one, which I think that was 2014 too, they're just amazing poems from like 4-year-olds. And it's been a little bit hard to keep up, because I realized what happened was that every parent who's like a poet like recognized these amazing poems that their kids had been saving them. So we had this really thick anthology of amazing poems by like little kids. That first one is just great. And later it became more of like a teenager, like it's up to age 15. And so the age is sort of drifted there, is like we get less submissions from the parents of young kids that have been saving them, Right. But it's still really cool to see what young people can do, because there's something about like adult writers are trying to get back to the space that children are at, where they're playing with language and using their imagination like that. And when we hit like almost puberty, I think maybe even is, like we get so self-conscious that we stop playing in that way, and you have to like learn as an adult writer to get back to that space that these kids are at naturally. And so it's amazing to read these poems, and there's just really, really good ones. And so we have it became a chapbook. That's another thing we have is the chapbook prize. We publish a chapbook with every issue too. And for the summer one, instead of an adult single chapbook book, we have the Rattle Young Poets anthology. So every subscriber gets a copy of that with the summer issue. So it's like, instead of like 50 like the first one was, it's like 20 poems or so, but they're still great stuff. Yeah, it's really fun to do.
Yeah, that's pretty adorable. I'm really kind of choked up hearing about it. And we have a comment from someone who says it's so true. They love the young poets' work in Rattle. It sounds amazing. So tell us about, sounds like you and your wife launched the journal.
No, actually it's not. So Alan Fox is the founder of Rattle. Rattle's been around for 25 years. So 25 years ago, I was like a teenager going through puberty.
Trying to get back to that place.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it wasn't me. So Alan Fox is like a businessman in LA. He's one of those people who like always had degrees and everything. Like he never stopped going to school. And he met James Reagan, who is the director of the MPW, Masters of Professional Writing at USC, like the USC's MFA at the time. And he convinced Alan to take the MFA. So he got that degree too. And he thought it was really fun writing all the time. And so after that, he wanted to continue it. There's a guy named Jack Grapes in Los Angeles who's an actor and a writer. And he's sort of famous in Los Angeles in the little writing community here. And he has workshops out of his house. And so to continue, Alan kept doing that. And this was 1994, 1993. It's really interesting. Jack Grapes teaches what he calls method writing, which if you're familiar with method acting, it's like the sort of the new way it's done. But now, instead of trying to get, make yourself cry, an actor will actually feel like the character and then react spontaneously. And so Jack Grapes' philosophy in writing is that you should do that with writing, and you should like get into the voice of the speaker of the writing and react spontaneously within that, and not be trying to project anything out, basically. So it's method writing. Anyway, so Jack Grapes has these workshops, and at the end they do a chapbook, like most people, a lot of workshops do. They just do a class chapbook at the end of the year, so everybody has a little thing to hold. And Alan volunteered to put that together at Kinko's, and because he thought it'd be fun, like picking the poems and stuff. And that became the first issue of Rattle. So Rattle number 1 is a class chapbook. I should have had it next to me. I don't know where my copy is. There's only a few copies left, but it's a little chapbook, just hand stapled at Kinko's. And that was the first issue of Rattle. And then the next 2, I think, were chapbooks too. And then he thought, hey, this is fun. Let's make it a magazine and keep going. And so they made it a bigger magazine gradually. And Stella Sue Lee was the first editor. She worked with Alan's company, but also liked poetry. So he said, hey, you want to work part-time doing the poetry thing as well as your regular work, and you won't work as much. And so she did that for a while. And then they hired me when she was ready to retire, basically 17 years ago.
And how did you know them?
I just submitted poems to Rattle. So I was a molecular biology major in college, and I worked in an mRNA lab, which is weird because it's so in the news now.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I realized I didn't like being a researcher. Like I had my whole path laid out in front of me, and I didn't like it. It was boring. So I didn't know what I was going to do, and I was just writing for fun. I thought maybe I'd be a science journalist or maybe go to med school or something, and I didn't know what. But I liked writing, and I wrote poems all the time. And so I submitted some to Rattle and just started chatting with Stella Sue Lee over email, because I was working at the time as a counselor at a group home for mentally ill adults. So I was like, and I'd worked a lot of night shifts. So I was like writing at night when everybody's asleep mostly, submitting poems and getting paid for it because I was just sitting in an office, And so I emailed some to Stella Sue. It was email that submissions were at the time. And she wrote back right away. And it was like 3 a.m. for me, or 6 a.m. for me. So it was like 3 a.m. in California. I was on the East Coast. And when she replied and said, thanks for the submission, I said, wow, you're up late or early. I didn't know. I hadn't really submitted much. I didn't know like conversation between editors and poets is like rare. And so she wrote back and said why she was up early. And I said, why I was, hadn't gone to bed yet. And so we started chatting, and we ended up chatting about poetry and stuff too, just over email. And then that was like, it, that was all that was to it. And then, I don't know, like a couple months later, they said, hey, we'd love to publish this poem. And we had a little chat again. And so we just kind of like chatted every once in a while. And at some point I mentioned that I was looking for like a part-time job because I was, I was really isolated. My whole life, I'm like night owl isolated. And I thought I should get some job in the public so I would just see people. and then she said, hey, if you want a job, you should work for me part-time. And so I started working for her a little bit. And little did I know that was the plan, that she was thinking about hiring me full-time and wanted to make sure I was reliable or whatever. And so then they asked if I wanted to do it, and I didn't know what else. I didn't have any plans really. I wasn't sure what I was going to do because I was in this like limbo where like this whole plan I thought I had, I didn't want to do. It was, the research is just very slow and monotonous. It's tedious, and I just didn't like it. And I didn't want to teach either, so I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I said, sure, I'll try this out. And then it turned out to be really fun because it's like running a business without the expectation of like making a profit, which is great. And I can just do, work as much as I can to do as much as I can. And there's so many different hats to wear. It never gets boring. And so I just love this job. So I've kept at it, even though I didn't think I ever would. I never thought I would be a poetry editor. That's like it's so bizarre.
That's great. And so we have a comment here that says, I love that you are not what people label an academic poet. And I love that too. And it's sort of a good segue to how I think about Rattle. Just looking at the about page, it's sort of described, it's accessible, it's readable. You make a point that it's not part of an ivory tower. It's for lawyers, landscapers, homemakers, and also Pulitzer Prize winners, where they're all treated the same. So do you see that as the vision of Rattle? Like the sort of, to me, it sort of seems like a populist. It's a poetry journal intended for everybody.
That was the intention. Because what it is was when Alan loved poetry when he was like young, and then, was, businessman and a lawyer and things like that in his middle age. Then he came back to poetry, and all the magazines, this was the late 80s, early 90s, when language school was like the big thing, and that's what the award winners were. And he just looked, it was like, what is this stuff? Like it's just so esoteric and academic that he wanted there to be like a nice space for poetry that tells stories, and is open to everybody, not just people with PhDs. And that's always been our goal and what we've always done. So I just continued that as our model. Because that's, when I was talking to Stella Sue and offered the job, it was because I was talking about this, about my feelings about poetry and aligned with theirs, and which is why. But like, for example, we have this, like this is the newest chapbook. I don't know if it's reversed or not, but this is The Death of a Migrant Worker by Gail Arzola. And it won the Rattle Chapbook Prize, one of the 3 winners last year. And Gail is the son of migrant Mexican workers, but he worked his whole life as a utility worker for an electric company, and also a softball coach. So his only book besides for this is a pitching lesson for girls softball. And but he writes poetry too. He's an avid reader and loves poetry. And so wrote this amazing little book. And it's just at the heart of what Rattle does. It's a way, he calls it self-therapy to write poetry, which is something we really believe in too. And just sharing and telling stories and recording people's lives. He wrote this to record his parents' lives, basically. And it's just a beautiful book. And that's really the goal of what we do at all times, is to have it be accessible to people who don't have MFA, or degrees or anything like that, who just want to write, because we think poetry is a really fundamental part of human nature. And it should be something everybody participates in. So the more people that participate in it, the better. And we don't want to, like bias toward any, award-winning people or anything. We don't. Every single person that we publish submits the same way. So like Ted Kooser, the poet laureate, is the poet on the front page of Rattle today, but he submits through Submittable like everybody else.
I was wondering that. I was surprised to see his name given the vision of the journal, but yeah, there you go. So he's submitting the same way. So Ted Kooser and Billy Collins and people, they just use Submittable too. That's and we great. Don't look at their, at our meetings, we don't look at their names either. We just read their poems. Oh wow. So it sounds like cover letters writers should not stress out about the cover letters.
No, they don't. Although one thing we do that's different too is that in the back of each issue, we have, instead of a bio, we have a contributor note where people just talk a little bit about themselves. And I try to make it so that they, you have to fill out a form right there. And so I try to make people, it's like I hope they say something spontaneous. And a lot of times that's like more interesting than the poem.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, like fairly often, so I take the poem that I think is a good poem with a note to the meeting. And if sometimes, like if you're on the fence about the poem, the note is just awesome. And so that actually does matter in a weird way. Like if you say something interesting there and it makes you seem like an interesting person and it's interesting to read, then we might be more likely to publish it too. So it does, that plays in a factor.
Will you ever work with a poet and say, hey, your contributors note really had something sparkling, maybe you can tweak your poem a little bit?
Yeah, we've done stuff like that. We've even other times, I can't remember which poem it was, but there's one poem that was the contributor note, and we were like, this poem doesn't really work, but this note is awesome. So let's make that a poem, and we did. Yeah.
That's so interesting. I wondered something about the pressure sort of being lifted, that people feel more relaxed, the spontaneity of it, going back to that idea of getting back to that childlike state.
I think that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, interesting. So we have 2 questions here, and somebody actually also emailed this question. A lot of people want to know, who is your favorite poet?
Oh gosh, that is the hardest question that people ask in interviews.
Or maybe top 3.
I guess I love Patricia Smith, Alan Shapiro, which he has never submitted again. We interviewed him once, so if Alan's ever watching, like I don't ask people for poems, so if they don't send, I can't publish them. Let's see, who else? There's just so many, and there's so many. Tashani Doshi is the poet I interviewed in this issue. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's an Indian poet. But she is like the real deal. I loved her new book, God at the Door, and it's talking to her. She is like the deepest, most real poet I've maybe ever met. She's amazing. So maybe I'll say those 3, but I mean, you could just go on forever.
So I know I was sort of teasing, but I promised I would give you a hard time about, my mom submitted a poem to you and it was roundly rejected. But I'm kidding, because I really do appreciate it. It was part of the a theme issue that was for older writers. I don't know what the cutoff was. Maybe it was like over 70 or something, over 60 or senior writers. It was a while ago. It was maybe like 6 or 7 years ago. But I really appreciate that you have these theme issues. So can you talk about, in spite of the fact that my mom didn't make it into the journal, can you talk about how you decide on these theme issues and how often you do them?
Every issue has some theme, and it's pretty haphazard how we do it. Actually, there's no rhyme or reason to it. Just something that occurs to us or somebody suggests that's interesting. We try. I haven't done, for a long time, I didn't do any topical themes. They were all based on like a group that has something in common. So like we do different like regions and things like that, or we do different styles of poetry, or we do everyone's favorite, I think, is usually the career themed ones. So we have like a lawyer's issue and a nurse's issue and like a service workers issue, and things like that. So people love those, and we love them too. They're really interesting to see that perspective. We never tell anybody they have to write about like it's a topic, even though like half of the people do anyway who submit. So so it ends up sort of being a little bit, but you sort of get to see around the periphery of that too. And I feel like I just come from a different background, maybe, where I think about this as like a scientific experiment that we're doing all the time. So I have no idea what's coming in. I love to see what happens when I don't know what's going to happen. And that's kind of part of the fun for me. So I try to think, we try to think of themes that'll just make an interesting little collection that have something in common, time together. And then you can see how, what that variable does and how that affects the writing. And that's kind of the point. So what do we have? We had Indian poets as the current issue. Appalachian poets was the summer. We had neurodiversity was the one before. So I don't know. So we have themes like that.
How often?
That's a quarterly magazine. So every 3 times or 4 times a year.
Oh, so every issue is a theme.
Yeah, the winter issue is the contest, the annual poetry prize that we do. So instead of a theme, we have the winners for the contest, and then the other 3 issues have a theme is like half the issue.
Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. So people do not need to submit to the theme; they can.
No, they don't. And but it's a way to add like the earlier, I think before we went in there, someone was asking about submitting a poem again, and that's the way it adds a different angle to the poem, because there's like a sort of a different context. So sometimes that works a little different, and maybe like if there's a poem about being a waiter, that might fit more in that issue than it would as a general submission. So things like that kind of play a little bit, but mostly we're just kind of curious to see what happens if we put out a call for submissions for something.
Absolutely. So we have a question here. Are you familiar with Planet Word Museum in Washington, D.C.? Have you ever heard of that?
No, never heard of it.
So somebody's saying you might want to think about contributing to the museum. Something to look into.
Interesting. Yeah, I'll write that down.
And so you, how many submissions do you get per?
I get a lot. Last year it was over 50,000 submissions of like 4 poems each, so like 200,000 plus poems. But it was a little bit inflated from the pandemics, because for the Poets Respond, for the news poem section, when the lockdowns in March 2020 happened, we were getting 1,000 a week just for that one news poem slot at the end of the at the week on Sunday. So it was a lot. It's more like 40,000 a year maybe 45 is normal.
That's way more than most literary magazines.
That's a lot. I mean, that's, submissions are free, which is one of the things, is that sort of populist egalitarian philosophy. Right. We never want to charge for submissions. I understand that a lot of people have to, but how we function, Alan put up like an endowment that pays me a salary. And then, so I don't have to worry about like eating, and I can just do whatever I want. And then then we have, 9,000 subscribers that subscribe, and then all that money pays for poets, people that we publish, and all the other little projects we do. Like, we don't make any money on the Young Poets Anthology because no one really buys it, but we give it to subscribers and the kids and their families. And so the subscription income pays for all that. And so I lost my train of thought. I don't remember why I'm talking about that now.
Well, I was wondering, I just thought 50,000 seems like
the submission
number, so much more than most other magazines.
Yeah, I think it's about the same as Poetry Magazine gets.
Okay.
I think that's I've seen say how many, and we're always like right around the same level.
Right. Okay. And when we were corresponding earlier this week, you had just that day sent out 4,000 rejection letters. So what does a day feel like for an editor?
Well, that is like on my calendar. It's like my least favorite day of the year. It's a very sad. Like I hate that day. Because we have a contest and there's a big prize. And so, if you have 10 or 11 winners are very happy, and then 3,989 are very unhappy with the results. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because poetry is such a very personal thing to people. It means so much so having to turn down things is hard. And then I don't know. So I get a lot of, emotionally charged responses that day. I actually sort of avoid my inbox all day and give me a little breather, because I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, you get a lot of, when you do anything in volume with the general public, you get all sorts of varieties of people, and there's people on the wings of the distribution curve who are, pretty far out there. So it's an interesting week. Like I get death threats and things like that this week, which is just weird. But
It's definitely weird. Yeah,
it is. I just like, it's a poetry, like we're just publishing poems, so.
Well, there's a note here. Someone says, I love your acceptance letters, but your rejection letters are equally unique and very kind.
Well, that's nice to hear. Oh, thanks. That's Carrie. I see the thing. Yeah. So I try to be encouraging, because what we want to do is like, and that's the thing that sort of is heartbreaking about sending a bunch of rejection letters at once, is people saying, like, I get a lot of them that say like, that's it. I keep submitting to everybody and no one ever published me. I'm never writing again. And that's just heartbreaking to me. And I try to like concisely, like I have to do everything, in mass, because you can't write personal email to that many people. So I try to find like this balance between like people who know what the game is, and the people who are just starting out that I don't want to discourage. Because I really think that writing is an important part of life. It's a deep magic that we all have access to. Like we evolved to do this. Like poetry is one of the most ancient tools. Like we had the hand axe, and then we had found fire, and then we had poetry. And poetry was like the third tool that the human species had as we were evolving into what we are today. And so everybody has these like neural networks that are involved in making and creating meaning through language like that. It's the logos. It's creating order from the chaos of human experience. And it's something that everybody should have access to. So I really hate, the idea that I'm discouraging anybody. But then people who are like really veteran poets hate that I'm like encouraging. So no matter what you do, like you can't make everybody happy. So I try to err on the side of not making people so depressed they stop writing poetry.
Yeah. So we have a question. It sounds like you're reading through so many submissions. How do you keep your mind fresh?
I don't know. It's hard. Like the submission, like me and Megan sort of split up the submissions. So like I usually do the news poems and the tribute themes, and then she usually does the general poems and the Ekphrastic at first, but you do it through rounds. So the first time you're reading, you're just looking for like any sign of life kind of, and then you put it aside to read more closely later. And then the stuff that's just not working, you can just move aside. So you're moving pretty quickly at the beginning. And then it's that when you narrow down the stacks, like the top 10% of them, that gets really hard. And it is tiring, like mentally, it's, so you have to sort of have, do it when you feel like you're in the mood to do it, and not when you're not, because it's hard to keep the focus on it. But for your own writing, I find it hard. The reason why I got into writing, because I love, or being an editor, is because I loved writing. But when you're an editor reading so many submissions, it's hard. It is hard to keep that, original, that spark going. So I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that. It's just sort of how it goes.
And so it sounds like a poet should absolutely keep submitting to the magazine. If they get a rejection, don't be discouraged generally, but definitely don't be discouraged from Rattle.
Yeah, for sure. And I think everybody, I've watched some of the interviews with other editors too. Everybody wants to publish somebody who's like, they haven't published before, or like even hasn't been published at all before. That's like the golden ticket or something. We love publishing people for the first time. And there's some people that I published for the first time 10 years ago who are now really well-known, famous poets. And I love that you're one of the first people that published their stuff.
Yeah.
So there's just we're always looking for poems, and we come at it from a really honest perspective, and we're looking for honest truth, basically. And the more submissions we get, the better, because then the better the magazine is, and the more people are participating, which I think poetry is a very valuable thing to be doing, whether you're publishing or not, because it's finding meaning and recording the meaning in your life and making sense of it all. And I think that's a really valuable thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever come across a poem that you really love, but for some reason doesn't feel right for Rattle?
There are a few poems that I feel like I should have published but didn't. It happens occasionally. Like sometimes a poem will be too dark. Like there's one that I remember, and like there are tendencies that like writers have. Like we do write about like negative, we're sort of a negativity bias. Because poetry is a means of problem solving, really. It's like a psychological thing that's going on. We're trying to make sense of issues that you have, and so it's really leans toward negative because it leans toward problems, and so they lean kind of dark. And sometimes we'll have a poem that's like, this is really great, but it's just too dark. And there's one that I always think about, because I don't remember who it was, and I feel like I should have done something with it at least. But it was poem that was instructions on tying a noose.
Whoa.
And it was like, so, and it was so straight-faced done. I have no idea who wrote this. And at the time I was like it was just like how you tie the knot. And I think about that all the time. At the time I thought, oh, this is just too dark. You know, you passed on it. And then later I thought, like, maybe we should have published that, and maybe I should like reached out and like asked if the person was okay. So I don't know. So I think about that's one that I think about all the time.
Yeah.
But it was really dark. And so stuff like that happens sometimes.
Yeah. And it sort of begs the question of what is the role of the editor? You know, like if somebody emails you back and says, thanks a lot for this rejection, I'm going to stop writing completely. Mm-hmm. Is that really your place to step in and say?
I don't know. I mean, I try to reply when people say that and mm-hmm. you know, encourage them that they shouldn't, and this is just how it goes. And, you know, everybody feels the same way about it. I mean, everybody feels rejection. It's just part of it's like, maybe because I played a lot of baseball, but in baseball you strike out a lot, you know, and that's just the way it goes. Yeah. And that's just the way this game is. There's so many people who are writing and trying to share things. Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult thing to do. And even doing what I consider a successful poem is really hard to do, because you're trying to, you know, the word poem comes from making, like from the Greek. You're making something. Mm-hmm. You're like creating something new, and it's really hard to create something new. It's not easy. It's easier for kids, but it's hard for us. It's hard to do. And so even you know, so it's a tough thing to do, even for the best poets. It's you know, we pass on poems from really, really well-known people all the time. Mm-hmm. And in a way I kind of feel like I have to let them down even more gently than everybody else, but that just is the way it works. It's hard to do poetry. I mean, it's not easy all they are scribbles on a page, you know, mm-hmm. and to get some kind of transformation in that little scribble on a page is not an easy job. It's mm-hmm. a tough task. You know, Randall Jarrell said that a good poet is someone who gets struck by, like, stands in the field their whole life and gets struck by lightning 3 times. And a great poet is someone who stands in the field of their life and gets struck by lightning 6 times. I think that's kind of true. It's tough to do poetry. It's tough to actually make it work. It's easy to kind of fake it. Mm-hmm. But when to actually get something that comes out of that spontaneous, creative place is pretty rare. And so people maybe don't understand that, but that's just the way it goes. Mm-hmm.
We have a question here that's sort of related: what to do about difficult or problematic poets who are antagonistic. So it sounds like you have received emails that are sort of unkind or maybe even frightening. How do you deal with that? And how do you sort of keep your cool? You know, you're trying to keep an open mind about this stack of submissions in front of you. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, you're getting like death threats from. Yeah.
Well, I find no matter what happens with those kind of emails, I don't know if that's the topic that she's asking about, but with those emails, one thing I do is just, I try not to send rejection letters at night, because people are more likely to be drunk, to be honest. Like, wow. I never occurred to me before.
Inside tip from an editor. Wow.
But yeah, because I used to get things like and before I had like a family and like, you know, a house and a dog and stuff, I do think I probably shouldn't, like, so somebody be like, if I see you, I'm gonna punch you in the face. And I'd say, you know, well, I'm gonna be at the office until midnight. Here's the address. I'll leave the door unlocked. Come on over. And that was just stupid. But I used to say stuff like that. But what would happen when he'd say that is the next morning they'd wake up and they'd say, oh, I'm so sorry. I was, you know, I had too much and I was emotional and I really apologize. And that happened a lot. So I realized that people are just like in that moment feeling a lot of, you know, I mean, the emotion of rejection. It's a tough thing to take. And then, you know, when other things.
Oops, Tim, your mic just went out. Is it? Oh, there you're back. Okay, yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
That's weird. Yeah.
Sorry, it might be on my end. Okay. Sorry about that.
But I just, you know, people are going through tough times. And maybe, you know, I worked as a counselor at a group home for schizophrenic adults. And, you know, just having that perspective, like, you don't know what is going on with people. And so that's what I kind of think. And I try to just remind people that I'm human and it's poetry, and it's just a little magazine, and it's just words on a page. And then usually they say, you know, they reply and humanity is restored. That's how that usually goes. Yeah. Relatedly,
have you seen a different kind of poem since 2020? Are you seeing a lot of pandemic poems or lockdown poems?
Yeah. And I'm kind of get tired of them, to be honest. I mean, that's, it sort of, it feels like much like it did after 9/11, where there are a lot of 9/11 poems all the time. The chapbook series that we did, the deadline is in the winter. So it was January 15th was the deadline. And since then, I mean, in that chapbook pool, which was like 2,000 manuscripts, maybe, so many were like Corona diaries, or like, it just, and it's, because poetry is a kind of therapy. It's like important to address the things, the stresses that you're going through. That's what poetry is. So everybody does gravitate toward the same thing. So we have been getting a ton of poetry stuff. And I say that, poetry is therapy. It like literally is. It's not just like saying that, or it feels like that way. I interviewed for the next issue of Rattle coming up, James Pennebaker from the University of Texas, Austin. He's a psychologist who did tons of research on expressive writing. I mean, he has a book. I can't remember what the book's called. I tell you, I have a bad memory. But he's done experiments, and writing about your traumatic events and making sense of them increases your physical health, as shown in like blood draws. Like you have more T cells after you write. I mean, he showed that with college students. And so it really is something like where we're finding coherence, like it's self-therapy. It's like a, and so when a traumatic event happens to everybody's writing about it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, it's tough to find, like we talked about the newness before. It's tough to find something new about it.
Yeah, so it sounds like that's not necessarily something you would like to see less of. So we don't want to discourage people from, if you have a COVID-related poem or, lockdown-related poem, certainly try to send it. But just know that a lot of people are also writing poems on this topic, and it's really important to find something new.
Yeah, and we try to be representative of what we're getting to. Like there's sort of a lot of things that when you're thinking about what to publish, like a lot of poems just jump out and you're like, we're publishing that no matter what. But then there's poems that are sort of on the fence. You're like, I don't know. But then you're trying to represent like what you're seeing in the submissions too at the same time.
Right.
Like I don't want to like project. I want to be completely neutral. Like that's my goal. I don't want to have a political perspective or a philosophical perspective as an editor.
Right.
I just want to publish what people are saying without me projecting myself onto it at all. And so if people are feeling like, because one of the things a literary magazine is a chronicle of the times, so you can look back and say, this is what people were writing about. And I don't want to like bias that. I want to actually present what people are writing about. So we do have coronavirus poems in the magazine. We didn't win. There was one that was really close to being the chapbook winner, I remember, but we ended up not, because we can only pick 3. And there was one like around 5 that we were kind of like, maybe, but we didn't. So we don't have a coronavirus book, but we have a lot of poems.
That's really interesting, because I think a lot of editors actually are trying to curate. They're not only trying to reflect what people are submitting, but they're also trying to put forth their own sort of ideological position. And it sounds like you're very consciously trying to not do that. So would you publish? How does that play into publishing poems that like maybe you don't necessarily agree with the position that the poet is taking, but it is a reflection of the zeitgeist? Just asking, because it's a really interesting distinction that I haven't heard editors make. It seems like a lot of editors are taking a stake in sort of like the social justice fight, which is valid. But I think it's also valid to say, like, I just want to publish what is out there, and sort of cover the landscape. So how does that play into publishing a poem that you may, not necessarily offensive, but that is not your own, not something that you agree with personally, but is a reflection of what's out there?
Yeah, well, we do that all the time. And I really like, there's, editors can do whatever they want and have their own perspective. And it's great. I think there should be all sorts of variety and it's great. But from my perspective, that's just not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in exploring the human condition. So I want to know what people are writing about. Like I want diversity across the board. One of the things I fret about is that there's so little like conservative representation in poetry, because like I mean, poets in general are just by temperament, like by the big 5 traits, are high in openness, and that makes you lean right, and then you end up in creative writing programs and humanities departments, which lean left, I should say. And then so everybody sort of gets in this circle where we have sort of very similar political views, and it's really hard to find anything outside of that box. And having poems that work outside of that box are so rare. So and that's something I actually worry about. Like I want to represent everything, and we're sort of not talking to the other side. And very rarely do we. And so I think that's actually a problem, because I think what a poem is like an empathy bridge or a little empathy machine, where you step inside of somebody else's body for a moment. Like if prose does this too, but poetry, that's like the heart of it. And there's a way that like political messages work better in this like indirect way. Like I always think of it. Have you ever read Dune, the Frank Herbert?
No, but I think I need to.
It's a good science fiction if you like science fiction. But they have they all have these like shields that cover their whole body. And so you can't shoot them with anything, because the bullet, if it's traveling too fast, like hits the shield, activates and it blocks it. But then it has to be like, if you're moving slow enough, it doesn't go on, because then you can pick things up,
Oh.
So everybody has these like shields. And so the only way you can fight is like by sword fighting kind of slowly, to get through that shield without it turning on. And that's how I think like poetry operates, is like that, like slow, like getting through. And technically it's the backfire effect that you get. But when you write political poems, if it's too overtly political, all you do is either have somebody applauding who agrees, or saying that's awful if you disagree. And it doesn't really have any effect, in my opinion. And so, but what poetry really does, and what it works wonderfully politically, is to get inside someone else's shoes and inside their body. And because poetry is a unique medium where the reader like is the medium. Like when I read a poem, or when you read a poem, like what the poem is playing is like my breath. Like the beat of the poem is like my heartbeat. That's what what an iambic foot is really a heartbeat. And the rhythm of the poem is the way I'm breathing at the time. And even if I'm reading to myself, the neurons are moving in the way that would move my mouth in those shapes. So you're playing me. And then, so there's that really deeply intimate connection that you get. And so if a poem like lets you step inside someone else's shoes, you can see a different perspective, and that can make a change. And so I don't know. So I think that's the way poetry operates, but it needs to be talking to everybody and like sharing these things, so we can have these bridges and understand where people are coming from. And I think that's kind of the role of politics and poetry. So I try not to have my own at all. I don't even try to say my own opinions about anything publicly. Like I don't want that to influence the submissions I get. Like I want news poems about current events that come from any perspective on the current event. I don't want people to think, hey, Tim believes this, so I should send him a poem that he agrees with. Like that's the last thing I want. So I try to not be too public, although it's hard to sometimes.
It sounds very reasonable, and yet I imagine some of it must be controversial. Like, do you get pushback from readers that are say, oh, you published this poem about some perspective that I don't agree with, and that's just not acceptable.
There's some famous instances in Rattle's history. The one that's like probably the biggest is the Rachel Custer "How I'm Like Donald Trump," which is one of the most misunderstood poems I've ever like seen be misunderstood. Although there's another one too. Maybe I'll tell you the other story too later. But Rachel's it's an extended metaphor that compares Trump to the Grand Canyon, as it's like the largest empty space. It's about narcissism, really. And then how she relates to that narcissism. And so somehow like that she empathized with Trump though was like really triggered people.
Wow.
So for the first, it was really interesting. For the first like 6 hours or 10 hours that the poem appeared, I got so many emails saying like, oh my God, this poem it's a great poem. People say I never thought of it through this perspective, and I've still never seen a poem that or any explanation, even like from a psychologist, that explains narcissistic personality disorder better than this poem. It's amazing. So people loved the poem for like 6 or 8 hours. Then it got on the the middle school cafeteria that is Twitter, and it became a food fight. And then people were mad because it was like humanizing the devil. And so that's just how it turned out to be. But I think that's what poetry's job is. Like that's what I'm trying to do. Like if I highlight a poem that like matters more than any other poem, that's one of the poems I'd pick. So that was a great poem. But the funny thing is, the other one I was going to say, there was a poem, and also from the Poets Respond comes up with the most reaction because it's like in the news and it's like people's response to the news. And there's a poem, I think it's called like My Body is Antifa, or I Am Antifa. It was Alejandro Escudé. And so this is something that's kind of hilarious to me because nobody knows in the literary world that this happened, I don't think. because like I said, the literary world is so left leaning that they don't see right wing media. But Jack Prosobiec, is that even a familiar name? See, he's like a right wing troll guy.
No, I don't. I've not heard of him.
Well, he retweeted the poem just this summer to his like million Twitter followers who are all like angry right wing people, and he was like, Antifa is writing poetry, and so I got all these like, angry heckling messages about how, the communists and the, there was so many, like thousands of comments on that post,
right?
And emails and things were coming in, and it didn't even register on the literary radar because it's a totally different informational sphere. So I got to watch this thing happening that no one even knew about. It was very strange. So I don't know. It's just
Rattle is not the magazine of Antifa. Let's just clarify.
No, we're not the magazine of anybody, is my perspective.
Yeah.
I think Antifa gets pissed off about poems that we publish too. So. It was just funny, like they're dueling it out.
Yeah.
Their interpretations of in the poem, like all good poems, because we try to publish poems that are complex and ambiguous. In that poem you could read it either way, and it's about a lot more than just agreeing with one side or the other. And it was just fascinating to read. And then, but the interesting thing was seeing some of the right-wing people on Twitter being like, wait a minute, I don't know if this poem is actually like in favor of Antifa. What about this line? And they were like slow your roll, like slow down. Maybe they're like against Antifa. And then,
that's amazing.
And then they'd be like, call other lines. They'd be like, no, they love Antifa. And it was just like somebody relating in a complicated way to the news.
Right.
So it's like poetry is beyond the kind of partisan shelling points that we fall into. So
that's great. It says so much about the magazine's reach. I mean, if you have a large reach, eventually you're going to reach different kinds of people, which really is a good thing.
yeah. I mean, that's the goal. Like I want to have a pro Antifa poem that reach that crowd in a way that they wouldn't think about it otherwise. And if they're not reading it, then that would never happen. So I'm glad if they are. There's like 4 people who understood what that poem was really about, but those 4 people made it more of an appreciation for everything after. So that's what I'm trying to do with that kind of thing. Yeah,
it's interesting too, and they feel that it's very high stakes too.
Yeah. They do, and it's just words on a screen.
Yeah. Okay, we have a lot of questions here. Does Rattle have room for poems with artwork or photos to illustrate the poem? So it sounds like the question is, do you accept artwork with the poem? And also, do you accept haiku, tanka, and hega?
Yeah, so for the first question, we do. The honest like economics of it, it costs, the paper and ink costs about 50% more to have color. So we've had certain times we had a few like color images that went with, and we sort of put those together in one issue. And we're a little more likely if something's black and white to include art with it, but we've done that a few times. Like mostly what we love is like what I love is the simplicity of words on a page making you cry or laugh or something. That's like amazing to me. So I don't usually do much art with it, but we do sometimes. I mean, we're open to anything. So if anything works, we had a CD in the back of one issue too. Like anything that feels like it's going to be appreciated, we'll do. But to be honest, you have a little bit better odds including art if it's black and white. Because you don't have to think of that like, hey, is this worth $10,000? And maybe it is, but you kind of have to think that way because it's just the economic cost of the printing bill that's going to come. Because you were printing over 10,000 copies, and so having color versus black and white makes a big difference.
Right.
And then for haiku and stuff, I love haiku. I write a saiku every weekend for our podcast just to show that there's more than just the political news to write about as poets. So I like haiku. We had a haiku or a Japanese forms issue 47. Interviewed Richard Gilbert. Next week on the podcast, we have Deborah Picolaggi as the guest on the podcast, who is the director, I don't know what the word is, the president of the Southern California Poetry Group, or haiku group, which is pretty influential. And that's one thing. I was just talking about this on the critique of the week because somebody submitted some haiku for that today. And I don't understand why haiku isn't more appreciated within the literary community, because a haiku is like the most fundamental poem there could be. It's like a nugget of poetry, and it's like essence, and very few literary magazines publish haiku, just I think because it gets a bad rap. It's kind of like a parlor game, the way it's taught to like, kindergartners with the 5-7-5, which is a total myth. And so maybe that's why, but haiku doesn't appear much in literary magazines. And we're one of the ones that it does. And so the haiku community starts, and then there's this like self-selection bias that always goes on too. So the haiku writers think nobody wants my haiku and they don't submit. And so we that's one of the reasons we have the themes, is to break through those barriers of like, hey, they don't like haiku. Then we have a haiku issue and they're like, oh, I guess they do like haiku, and I can send them haiku, and then we can have haiku and issues. And so we do have haiku and haiben and things like that pretty regularly now since that issue. So that issue really worked, because that was the whole point of the issue, was to get those haiku folks on board.
Okay. And I think I pronounced it haiku. I'm not familiar with that. It's haiku,
haiga.
Oh, haiga.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, that's how I say it. I don't know if I say things right either. So
Thank you for not making me feel bad. Okay, so we have a question. I didn't realize this. So the prize for the poem for your contest is $25,000.
15.
Oh, 15. Okay.
But I think if you add up all the different prizes, it adds up.
Okay.
Maybe that's the thing.
So
the runner-up gets 5, and then so it would be 25 total. Yeah.
Okay. So how is the winner of the big prize selected, and how do you justify putting all this monetary value onto a single poem when it could be used for other important issues, is the question.
Yeah, well, there's an economic reason for contests, and they work, so the entry fee is a 1-year subscription. So the whole thing is designed to be like its own little economy, and it helps us it's like a fundraiser for us, really. And so, but with the idea that we're raising funds at the same on one level, but then we're also increasing our subscriber base on another. So people who are only like have a passing interest in poetry maybe say, hey, I'll try that for this. And then they get the magazine for 4 issues and 4 chapbooks. And maybe they're turned on to doing this more. And people say that all the time, that's happened. So that's kind of the goal too. And so the big prize money is just to get, to have people notice, so you can put an ad in some regular magazine that's not poetry, and people will want to submit. It's like, whoa, look at that prize and money. And then they get sort of hooked into the little poetry world, which is what we think. We think poetry makes the world better. And so we want as many people writing and thinking of their lives in that way, and finding more meaning. Like, it's a very spiritual, really, thing to me. I feel like it's a secular religion, is what, like, they're little prayers that we do. And we're really missing, religion without the religion or something. Mm-hmm. It's something that's a real need, but people don't realize that it's a need. And so it's a way to reach out and expand out of the literary circle, basically, even though the winners tend to be, the best writers. And so it's hard to, but the hope is that other people are like hooked in and become more frequent contributors and things like that. And people like Gail Arzola here that, are writer later in life and things like that. So we try to draw in more people with the prize money, and it pays for itself. Obviously, it pays more than for itself. Even when you factor in the subscription, it's what funds paying poets and the rest of the issue, is the extra entries we get and extra subscribers we get from that.
How does Rattle do its outreach? How do you grow your audience? Because it seems like you're not going to AWP, you're not doing sort of the traditional ways that you would sell your magazine and connect with potential readers. So how are you finding your audience? Social media, share. I mean, I just try everything. Like I'm a sciencey type person, and so how you throw things at the wall and see what sticks, and you test the A/B test and see what's working. For a long time, Facebook ads worked really, really well. So we were doing a lot of Facebook advertising, and then they changed their algorithms, and they're not as good anymore. And I'm trying to I'm doing more with like Google ads and things like that on YouTube, because I find the cheapest places to reach out. Because the problem is, I think pretty much everybody at the AWP like knows Rattle already and has an opinion. Either they love us or hate us. There's one or the other. And so they're like, advertising within that sphere doesn't really do much. So I try to focus on other things, because I want more people writing poetry. That's my job, and reading poetry too. It's like a two-way street that connects either way. So I try to find, and so social media advertising, the way it targets, and Google ads, AdWords and things like that really work well. I try not to do. Ads worked well in review back in the day. I like that worked well, but that was sort of earlier. And now I think we sort of saturated the AWP kind of crowd already, so it doesn't really matter as much. Okay. Is that why you? I'm sorry.
What's that?
Is that so? You mentioned don't attend AWP? Is that because you don't feel like it's like cost benefit, or are there sort of other reasons?
There's so many reasons. Like it's not my thing, first of all. Like I don't like socializing on that level. It's not the group. Like AWP is really a trade fair for MFA programs. That's really what it is. And like we're not in that environment. Like our goal is not to be in that environment. You know, I mean, we want to encourage people there. Everybody's welcome here. Everybody's welcome, but that's not like our target audience. And then just the economics of it, the cost benefit, just in the budget wasn't really worth it. And so I went to the LA one because it was worth it economically. But otherwise, it's just, to me, it's not worth it. And then I'm not, you know, we have like a big footprint, but we're tiny. Like I don't have any interns or any, you know, I don't have a big group of people. It's just me and my wife, and one of us has to stay home with the kids. So it's just me going in my little booth, you know, and saying hi to everybody. And some people like being really friendly and some people glaring at me. And it's just, there's no, yeah. So there's nothing to be gained from that, in my opinion. Although if I was an MFA program, it would be like the height of my, you know, year to recruit people and, you know, get that kind of networking going. But we don't. And I specifically also try not to network. It's back to that like neutrality idea. I don't want to like feel bad that I'm not publishing someone because I know them or something. Or I don't want to have like people think that they have some kind of in or anything. I just want to read poems, and the ones that like resonate and are from that honest, spontaneous place and creating something, I want to publish those. And I don't want to have personal connections get in the way of that, even though I wouldn't let them, but it feels bad.
Yeah.
So I try to just be up in our little mountain doing our magazine. And we're always been the outsiders, because like Alan, who founded the magazine, is just a business guy and didn't have any connections with anybody. And we don't have any connections with anybody. And I kind of like want to keep it that way. So that's why I don't go to AWP either.
We just there are a lot of great comments here, and I'll post the chat later, and I'll send you the chat. But somebody just said, the more I listen to Tim, the more I understand why I love Rattle. So that's,
that's really nice.
Warm, fuzzy feelings.
Yeah.
So are you ever looking for more help, or are you pretty committed to just the system?
No, we like to do it small. Like I'm on other boards actually for other nonprofits. Like our board is just 3 people. And our production team is just me and my wife. And you're so agile that way. You don't have to like have these, like I'm on 2 other boards, and you have like these meetings where you're like going over for hours, like whether to put a comma here, you know, and there's just none of that at us. So we can just like cruise through. I don't have to train anybody on anything because I just do everything. And there's so much more like, just like efficiency to it. Like I like efficiency.
Yeah.
And so, and also we're in the middle of nowhere too. Like we're in the woods in the national forest.
Wow.
And it'd be a long commute for anybody if they were working. We don't have an office or anything.
Yeah.
And I feel weird about people being in my house. So, you know, I mean, people could work remote now, and maybe eventually we will, but I like how streamlined we are.
Yeah.
And I think it's just more functional. Like we have one of the highest, you know, subscriber bases, but the smallest staff and the least budget relative, you know, like magazines with much smaller circulation have a much higher budget because of all the people on staff and things like that. And we're just able to cruise through and be really lean and make quick changes too. And when we have an idea, like talking about the Young Poets Anthology, Megan was like, hey, it'd be cool if we did a Young Poets. And then like 3 hours later, we had a call for submissions up and we were doing a Young Poets Anthology. Great. And so I like being like that. So I think we're going to stick to it this way.
Yeah. That's great. So are you guys open for submissions all year?
Yeah, it never closes. So there's deadlines for the themes and for the contest. We have the chapbook prize and the single poem prize, which are the only things that have an entry fee.
Okay.
But the entry fee is always just a subscription, because again, the point is to get more people reading poems regularly.
Okay.
So they're open. The general submissions are open all the time. Response times vary greatly depending on the time of year, because we have to focus on different things. But yeah, they're
anything coming up that we can tell people about? Contest?
The next Young Poets Anthology deadline, I think, is November 15th.
Okay.
So if you know any young people that have poems, or
what is the age? I'm asking.
It's up to age 15.
And start, I guess, as soon as they can write.
As young as you can. Like we have a bunch of poems that are people who, like, you know, like a little 3-year-old kid will say, hey mom, I'm going to write a poem, and then they record it. and then they just transcribe the recording as the way a lot of parents do to record themselves.
Oh, wow.
And there's some great ones that are like that.
I happen to live with a little aspiring poet, so that's really cool.
Yeah. So that's coming up, and then
So sorry, can you clarify that? So the child can record the poem, and then the parent submits the voice, or the parent transcribes?
Just transcribes it. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So there's some great poems like that.
That's really cute. Okay. Sorry, I cut you off, and then other things.
No, it's okay. And then our next big deadline, we have a tribute to librarians.
Oh, nice.
Is the next issue, the October 15th. If anybody has any suggestions for who to interview, I'm not sure who spent a lot of time as a librarian and is like a good poet that would combine the two. So if anybody has any suggestions for a librarian poet to interview, I'd like to though just pick a cool, somebody who submits a poem and then we interview that person for the interview spot. But if anybody has any ideas, you can send that, or if you know any librarian poets or are a librarian poet, make sure you submit for that.
Okay.
Then we have the chapbook contest coming up. The deadline is January 15th, so you just submit a chapbook to that. And the cool thing about that, of course, is that all our subscribers get a copy of your book, so it's like a poetry bestseller immediately. Was the sort of point of that. And then after that, what are we doing? Oh, we're doing Prisoner Express issue, which is this project where there's a nonprofit based in Ithaca, New York, that sends reading material to prisons. And then there's this project they have poems, and so we're going to publish a bunch of those poems. So I'm not sure what's after that, but that's what's
a lot.
Yeah,
that's great. Somebody here.
We always have
Julia Bausma is a librarian and the new poet laureate of Maine.
Ah, perfect. Yeah, that might be a great suggestion. Thanks. I'll write that down too. Let's see. So I was going to say something else, but I can't remember what now. Anyway, never mind.
Sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's okay.
I'll send you the chat so you'll have all this information.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. And people should all subscribe to Rattle. Find it. It's rattle.com.
Right? Yep.
And
rattle.com,
on Twitter, you are. Somebody has a question. What headphones are you using? They look great. I agree. They are pretty nifty headphones.
It's actually funny. So Megan got these for me for Christmas 10 years ago, and I thought at the time I was like, I don't know, I don't listen to music that much. Why do I need nice headphones? And then when I started doing podcasts, and it was perfect because I need headphones because I play music and stuff on the podcast and things. I needed to not come through the microphone. So I don't know where they came from. They were a Christmas present a long time ago.
They look very professional.
Yeah, they are nice. I like it.
That's great. So rattle.com, and on Twitter you are at Rattle.
I think it's Rattle Mag on Twitter.
Okay.
Which I really don't use. I hate Twitter. So
okay.
So don't bother with Twitter. Facebook, I started to use Instagram more.
Okay.
So you can find us there on any of those platforms.
And it's a Facebook page for Rattle.
Yeah. I think Facebook is Rattle Magazine, but you'll find it. If you go to the rattle.com, there's social media links, and the YouTube channel, which is probably the most used of all if you want to subscribe somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tim. This was really fun. It's so great to hear about your magazine.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. This is a great series, and I'm going to keep watching them because I really do like to see what other people are talking about and thinking about. It really is. Yeah. So thanks for doing it and taking all the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.